Masechet Gittin Daf Samich Vav. The topic today is a husband authorizing someone else to write and give a get on his behalf, which he can do. But what if he does it with ambiguous language? He only says write it and not give it. So first we're going to talk about husbands that are about to die. Their words are taken more seriously. And then on Amud Bet, we'll talk about husbands who are healthy and the type of language that they use and what it means. All right, so we start off. Barishona hayu omrim. Hayose bekolad ve'amar kitvu get li'ishti hare elu yichtibu ve'yitenum. The original law is that someone who is in a neck chain, that means that he was arrested and is about to be executed by the government. And while he's going out to be executed, he says, write a get for my wife, right? Whoever's listening, he tells them, go write a get for my wife. Now, even though he's about to die and his wife will no longer be married to him after he dies, he may want her to have a get before he dies so that she won't have to deal with Yavam, for example. So we say that whoever's listening should write it and give it, even though he only says write a get. And so normally, and they could only write it, but they can assume that he also wants it to be given. Like if a husband is healthy and he says write a get, so then fine, you can go write a get, but he didn't say he wants it to be given yet, so we can't assume that. This person, however, since he's about to die, we assume, why would he want it to be written? Just to be there? He's going to decide tomorrow? He's not going to be around tomorrow. And therefore, we assume that he means write it and give it, and so we can actually go ahead and do the whole process. That was the original law. But then, later on, they expanded the application. Chazru lomar afa mefaresh vayoseh b'shayara. And they said, even someone who goes to sailing, sets sail on a ship, or someone who travels on a caravan. These are dangerous types of travel, and a lot of times people would die, or we wouldn't know where they were. They might drown, or maybe they didn't drown, and we don't hear from them again, or maybe they got captured by robbers along the way. And so to prevent an aguna problem, they said, listen, I'm going on a long trip. I don't want my wife to suffer. And so he tells someone, write a get. Even though he only said write a get, we assume he means write and give it, and we are authorized to do so. Rabbi Shimon Shezuri Omed Afa Mesukan. Rabbi Shimon Shezuri adds also someone who is very ill, and he says write a get. We assume he's saying that because he realizes he is near death, and so he wants his wife to be free. And even if you didn't say give it, we still give it on his behalf. And now we have a story about Geniva, Yoseh bekolad hava. We mentioned Geniva a couple of times already in this Masechet. He was an early Amora who was Bar Uryan, very brilliant, but also contentious. And he had a lot of tension with the Resh Galuta and also with the Persian government. And one day the Persian government arrested him and was taking him out to be executed. As he was being taken out, he said an oral instruction, not about divorce, but we're going to compare the two, but about something about financial gift. He says, I want you to give 400 zuz worth of wine to Rabbi Avina. He was close to Rabbi Avina, that was his student, from the wine that I have in Nahar Panya. So remember this phrase, from the wine. He doesn't say give 400 zuz of wine, but rather from the wine, like any that he wants to choose. This will be this will be important at the end of the sugya. All right. So now, usually, if I want to give a gift, then we have to do some kind of act as a transaction, a kinyan. You're actually going to have to pick it up, or you could do chalipin and give me something, and by picking that up, then you acquire it. You have to do an act. Words do not complete a transaction for you normally. However, if someone is about to die, then their words, depending on certain cases, can be an acquisition in and of themselves. So that's the question here. Does this work? Amar Rabbi Zera. Dara Rabbi Avina l'silte ve'azal legabed Rav Huna Rabbe. Rabbi Zera ruled on this matter, and he said it's fine. Rabbi Avina, the recipient of this gift, he can go with his basket, take that wine, and he can follow the ruling of Rav Huna, his teacher, on this matter. Because Rav Huna said that this is okay. Rav Huna said two statements. It's only the second one that's going to be relevant to us. ואמר רב הונא גיטו כמתנתו, עמד מתנתו אם עמד חוזר, אף גיטו אם עמד חוזר. The first ruling of Rav Huna is that the get is the same as a gift. Just like with a gift, if the person gets better, then he can revoke the gift. In other words, the person is sick. He said, I want to give a gift to that person. And then he gets better. He says, listen, I didn't mean it. I meant it because I thought I was going to die. I would have given it to you when I was going to die, but now I'm going to be alive. I was going to give you my house, but I'm alive. I need my house. So he can revoke it. So to a get, if he says, give a get to my wife, and he says that while he's sick, he's saying that because he thinks he's going to die. If so, all of a sudden he gets better, he can tell them, no, I didn't mean it. Don't give it. Right? I revoke my get. Do not give it to her, and he can change his mind. Okay, that's ruling number one. Second ruling that's relevant to us, Umagito afagav de la parish, kevan damar kitvu afagav de lo amar tenu. Just like regarding a get, even if he didn't specify to give it, as long as he said write it, he's about to die, and he thinks he's about to die, even if he didn't say give it, we assume he meant give it, right? Because he's dying, so what would be the point of writing it? If a person is healthy and he says write a get for me, it could be that he just wants to have it on hand because maybe he'll decide to use it later, maybe not. Okay, so that's one. So too, just like with a get, as long as he commanded the beginning of the process, we assume the end of the process. So too regarding a gift, aft matanato, kevan damar tenu afagav de lo kanu mine. If someone is dying and he says, give a gift to someone, even though he only said the words, and the words are only the beginning of the process, because there was no acquisition, we assume that we assume the rest, and we continue the rest of the process, and we allow the person to go and take it. Right? So that's the parallel. Even though in the get case he didn't say tenu, in the matana case in the get case, he didn't say tenu. In the gift case, he did say tenu, but the parallel still works. In the get case, he says write it, but it only is effective when the get is given. Even though he didn't say the effective part, we follow through. So to here, even though he just commanded to give, but didn't do the effective part of actually making a transaction, we can still do that after the person, even after he dies. Okay, so therefore, according to Rav Huna, Geniva said, I wanted to be, give this gift, even though it was only words. Nevertheless, the recipient, Rabbi Avina, can go ahead and do it, right? And because he can rely on Rav Huna said, as long as he's dying on his deathbed, in this case, he's about to be executed. Nowadays sometimes people survive execution by injection, but in those days they chopped off his head, and they're not going to survive. And so we can so even though he only said words, we can assume that he really meant it, and we can authorize Rabbi Avina to go ahead and take the wine because he can follow Rav Huna. All right, that's Rabbi Zera's ruling based on Rav Huna. However, there is a disagreement. Matkifla, Rabbi Abba disagreed with this halacha, where it's going to be unclear what Rabbi Abba actually said and what his disagreement was, and we're going to go through three different versions of his objection. So here's version 1. One of his first version is saying, well, if a gift can be given after death, then so too a get can be given after death. Now, this is not clear because this doesn't make any sense. We understand it makes sense to say that a present applies after death, because let's say the wine in this case, the wine is still there, and if the person said, Geniva said, here, I want you to have wine, but then he dies, the wine still exists, now it goes into his estate, and so it makes sense to say, even though he died, the estate should allow the person to go and take the wine, because even though it was only words, then we can finish the process after his death. That does make sense, but get after death makes no sense. Because they're not married anymore. A person gets, a marriage ends in two ways, through a get or death of either party. So once the husband dies, there is no marriage anymore, so there's no point in giving a get after death. The whole concept does not apply anymore. So that can't be what Rabbi Abba was saying. Ela Rabbi Abba hachika kashya le. Rather, this is what he was saying. Matanat shechi mera b'miksati. Matanat shechi mera b'miksat ba'aya kinyan. Here's his problem. Everyone agrees that someone on his deathbed, if he says, I want this person to have all of my property, he gives away all of his property, then it's clear that he's giving it away seriously because he's dying. He's not keeping any for himself. And everyone agrees that that would be a proper authorization. However, if a person on his deathbed only gives away some of his property but keeps some for himself, well, that means he thinks he's going to live, because otherwise, why is he keeping anything back for himself? And in that case, that would be the same as a healthy person trying to give a gift with words only. Words only do not make an acquisition for a healthy person. And so here's the problem. Geniva, although he was definitely dying, but he only gave away 400 zuz. He didn't give away everything. And therefore, his words should not be taken seriously and followed through with, right? Maybe he thought that somehow he's going to live. Okay, so that's Rabbi Abba's challenge. It's a good challenge. Now, Miklal de Rav Huna sabar la baya kinyan. Now, so does this mean that according to Rav Huna, even when he gives away only some of his property, you don't need a kinyan? Words alone are good? Doesn't everyone agree that if even someone on his deathbed only gives away some of his property, that he has to do a kinyan, because it's not clear that he's doing it because he's dying? So we answer, no, this case is different. This is not the case same as a deathbed scene. Here, he's being taken out to death, and he's definitely going to die. It's very clear to everyone and to himself that he's giving it because of his imminent death. And so in the case of someone who's about to be executed by the government, or for example, or if he's, about to die and he says, I'm about to die, and therefore, right, or if it's very clear that he's giving a gift, even if it's only a partial a gift of his property, but it's very clear that he's definitely going to die and he's giving it because he's going to die, like if he says so, then everyone, Rav, even in that case, Rav Huna says, yes, words alone work. This is different from a regular deathbed scene where a person's on his deathbed, but they might be on the deathbed for many days, and they might get better, and you don't know what the person himself is thinking. So even if we know that the situation doesn't look good, he might think he's going to get better. Therefore, in a regular deathbed scene, it does depend, and Rav Huna would agree that it would depend on if he gives away all his property, it's clear he's doing it because he is dying, and then that's valid. If he gives away only some of his property, then it's not clear he's doing it because he's dying, and we cannot assume that this is really the instructions of someone dying. We have a principle that you should always fulfill the words of someone who's dying. Mitzvah lekayem divrei hamet. But that's only if he is saying it because he knows he's dying. And so therefore, we reconciled Rav Huna with the general halacha. Someone on his deathbed who gives away all his property, yes. Someone on his deathbed who gives away part of his property, no, the words alone are not good. But someone who gives away part of his property, but is definitely doing so because for sure he's dying, then according to Rav Huna, the words alone work. Miklal de Rabbi Abba sabar misvah misaveh mehamat mita ba'aya kinyan. Now we turn back. You're telling me, according to Rabbi Abba, when someone, his head is about to be chopped off, and he says, I want to give away part of my property, you're telling me that would require an act and words alone wouldn't be good? Right? Isn't it clear that he means it and he's doing it because he's about to die? Don't we know that he does not require a kinyan, right? He's about to be killed. It's very clear. It doesn't matter that it's only a partial property. So Rabbi Abba, what's his objection? All right, so now we have the third interpretation of Rabbi Abba's objection, because that objection was not strong enough. The problem is he didn't say give him wine. If he said, I want you to give him wine, that's understandable. If he said, I want to give him the monetary value of wine, meaning the estate will sell the wine and give him 400 zuz, that is understandable and that would be valid. Here the problem, he says, give him from wine. What does that mean, from wine? The phrase is too ambiguous. That's what Rabbi Abba was objecting to. Geniva, when he was about to die, if he said, give him wine, fine. If he said, give him monetary value of wine, good. But give him from wine, I don't know what that means. And that's why he said it should be invalid. So v'idach, and Rav Huna, how does he interpret that word? Mehamra kedeleapot et kocho. Shelchu mitam mehamra kedeleapot et kocho. Rav Huna says the reason why Geneva said, give him from the wine, is he wanted to increase the ability of Rav Avina to collect. If he only says, give him wine, and then the wine spoils, or some of the wine spoils, then they said, well, here's your wine, right? Geneva said, give you wine. Here it is, right? It's spoiled, your problem. So when you say from the wine, that means that Rav Avina can come and say, I choose whatever part of the wine I want. I can choose this barrel or that barrel, and so it increases his ability to take what he wants. And similarly, if he's just said the monetary value of the wine, and then the value goes down, or they sell it and they lose the money, then the inheritors can say, oh, well, you're supposed to get the value of the wine. Oh, sorry, the value was lost. So that's why he says from the wine. That way, Rabbi Avina can come and say, I want the money, I want the wine, I want this barrel. He can choose, and that increases his ability to collect. And sure enough, this was confirmed from a message from Eretz Yisrael that they said the phrase mehamra means to increase the ability to collect. And so that is why Rav Huna and Rabbi Zera said this is a valid form of acquisition, even those only words. He was about to die, and the words make sense, and yes, he can go and collect it. All right, next Mishnah. Misha haya mushlach labor v'amar kol hashamea et kolo yichtov get liishto hare elu yichtevu v'yitenu. Someone is thrown into a pit. It's a very dangerous place to be. Maybe he'll get out. Maybe he won't get out. And so he's down in the pit, and no one can save him. So he screams out and he says, "Anyone who can hear me, write a get for my wife." Right? I don't know what's going to happen to me down here. I may die. I may never recover. You won't know where I am. So I don't want my wife to be stuck. And so anyone who's hearing it should go and write a get. And even though he only said write, he can give the get also. Same thing as before. He's in a dangerous situation. And here we're talking about even if the person who's hearing it doesn't see him at the bottom of the pit and doesn't identify who it is, if he announces, he says, listen, I am Mr. A, the son of Mr. B, and I whoever can hear this, write a get from my wife. Her name is, right, Mrs. C. So even though the person didn't see him, they can still go ahead and follow those instructions and even give the get. All right, now we have a bit of a strange question. V'lechu shema shedu. How do you know that the voice coming out of the pit was from a human being? Maybe it's a demon who is creating a voice and making believe that they are a human being. All right, the belief in demons was quite common, especially in Bavel. It was used to explain a lot of things. We believe in it also today. We just have different names for it. We call it a virus or bacteria, right? All kinds of things that happen to a person that we can't see and we can't identify. So now we can see them with microscopes. But they had the same phenomenon back then. They saw that people, would get sick or feel things, and they couldn't see what the cause was, so they gave it a name Shedim. This will learn a lot about Shedim now. So maybe it's a shed that made that voice. Amarav Yehuda keshera'u lo demut adam. No, they did see a human form down at the bottom of the pit. They just couldn't make out who it was. They weren't able to identify. Therefore, we know it's not a shed, because right now we're assuming that demons, they have some kind of maybe ghostly form, but not a human form. And so maybe the shed is just impersonating someone just to annoy him, because now, his wife will be divorced or thinks she's divorced and cause them problems. These demons can be very annoying. But then we correct this assumption. It says it's not true. Although demons usually are just kind of ghostly, but they can take human form. Even if you see a human form, how do you know it's really the person? And the answer is dechazule babu'a, because we see a shadow. Only human beings create shadows. Demons, even if they can take a human form, there's no shadow. And so we answer to that, that's not true. Inuname itlehu babua. Even demons have shadows. So we follow up. No, the chazule babua de babua. We see a shadow of a shadow, a double shadow. It's like when you have two sources of light or light that refracts, you can have one person can create two shadows. And here the assumption is, while a demon can take human form and can have one shadow, but they're kind of like one-dimensional, so they don't make two shadows. Okay, v'dilma inhuname itlehu. Wait, how do you know? Maybe demons can have a double shadow. Amar bichanina limedani Yonatan beni babua itlehu babua de babua it let lehu. And so Bechanina says, no, my son Yonatan taught me that demons have one shadow, but they do not have a double shadow, and that's the reason why we don't have to worry that this is a demon, because we see something like a human form down at the bottom and a double shadow, and therefore it must be a real person. This is like how we verify that people really stepped on the moon, right? You can see their shadows and double shadows, but people that don't think it was all NASA made a hoax, right? They look at the shadows. See, it was not a real shadow, it was facing the wrong way. All right, anyway, vidilma sadahi. Now, wait, how do you know? Okay, that we can rule out that it's not a demon. But how do you know? Maybe it's an even more pernicious power. Maybe it's a co-wife. This is a person, this man's married to two wives. And so imagine this. The co-wives, they always hate each other, understandably. So one of the co-wives will go down to the bottom of the pit, right? And she will impersonate her husband's voice and say, I am Mr. So-and-so, and whoever can hear me, please divorce. And then she'll say the name of the other co-wife. So maybe this is a, co-wife A who's trying to get rid of co-wife B. So she goes down into the pit, says, whoever hears me, I am the husband, go write a divorce for co-wife B. If someone hears that, and then they write a divorce for co-wife B, and then co-wife B will think that she's divorced and go marry somebody else, then she'll be prohibited from ever going back and returning and marrying her original husband. And that will make co-wife A very happy to get rid of her rival. And so maybe it's a Sada impersonating the husband. And the answer is Tana de Rabbi Ishmael b'shat sakana kotvin v'notin af al pi she'en makirin. Rabbi Ishmael says when it's a time of danger, then we are lenient, right? Like when there's a war or right enemies coming around and right people are being kidnapped or dying. So then we have to be lenient and we write even though we don't recognize the person. If a person says, I am Mr. So-and-so, and we can't quite see them or recognize them, we assume that they're telling the truth, and we give it. And therefore, here in this case also, this is a time of danger, and even though we don't see the person and recognize him, and we don't know for sure it's the husband, it could be someone impersonating the husband, it could be the co-wife, who has a reason to do so. Nevertheless, at a time of danger, we have to be lenient and assume that it is the person, and that's why it's permitted. All right, next. If you have a healthy person, and he says, write a get for my wife, then you can write it, but you can't give it. Why? Because we assume that the person is only trying to mock his wife. He just wants to annoy his wife, give her a hard time. And so, I don't know, his wife did something that annoys him. And so he says, some people, write a get for my wife, right? To kind of make her scared, right? And then they go and laugh at her. All right, not such a nice thing to do. And the point is that he doesn't really mean, he might mean to write it, but he doesn't mean to give it. And therefore, it cannot be delivered. That's the difference between a healthy person. I don't know how healthy he is that he's treating his wife that way, but that's different. That's just marriage problems. But he's otherwise healthy, so he doesn't really mean it. Unlike someone who's about to die, he's not going to say write a get just to annoy his wife. If he says write a get, he means he wants it to be given as well. All right, and then we have a story. Maaseh bebari echad she'amar kitvu get liishti ve'ala l'rosh hagag ve'nafal u'met. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel im atzmo nafal harei ze get im haruach dahatu eno get. They have a story about a healthy person, meaning he's physically healthy. He had no physical disease, and he said, write a get from my wife. He just said write. He didn't say give it. So if that was the end of the story, then we would not give it. Here's the thing. Right after he did that, he climbed up to the roof, fell down, and died. So what do we do with this? Because he was healthy a second ago, but look, now he's dead. So Rashbag says, if he fell on his own initiative, if he jumped off, then it is a get, because that means he knew he was about to commit suicide. So he said, write a get, because he says, I'm going to go, right after this, I'm going to go commit suicide. I don't want my wife to have to fall to a yavam. And he goes up and jumps off the roof. Then that would be the same as someone on his deathbed, someone about to be executed. So, because what he did after that shows his mindset that, a few minutes before. However, if he said, write a get for my wife, he's a healthy person, and then he goes up to the roof and a sudden gust of wind pushes him over, well then that doesn't mean, then we don't think he was committing suicide. This is an accident. He went up to the roof to get some fresh air, to calm down. Maybe he was angry, maybe to laugh about what he just did, and unfortunately he fell off the roof accidentally because of a wind. So in that case, we assume that when he said write the get, he only meant to mock his wife, and he didn't mean that it should be given. So even though he died a few minutes after, we do not give the get. Okay, Maaseh listor. Now we ask a question. That you're bringing a story here to contradict the law. The law said that a healthy person who says write a get, we do not, it's invalid. And then you bring a case of a healthy person who says write a get, and if he meant to commit suicide, it is valid. So how can this be? And so the answer is hasura mehasira v'achikatani. Im ochiach sofo al techilato harei ze get. We're missing words, and this is how you should explain it. If his end teaches something about his beginning, meaning right now he seems healthy, and he said write a get, so we know he's just mocking, we're not going to give it. But if sometime later he jumps off the roof, then that shows us that beforehand, retroactively, now we see that he was actually quite unhealthy, and he was already planning to commit suicide, and therefore it is a get. And in fact, we have exactly such a story of someone who said, write a get for my wife, and then he went up to the roof and he fell and died. And Rashbag says, if he actually fell on his own account and committed suicide, it is a get, because now we see that he was planning to die, and it's the same as someone on his deathbed or someone about to be taken out to be killed, and we assume that he's not saying it just to annoy his wife, but that he meant it. Hahu gavra de'al lebe kenishta. Ashkach makre yanoka ubre diatvi v'yatib inisha charina gabayhu. Another story about someone who entered a bet knesset. He found a teacher and a teacher's son, and they're both sitting there. Let's assume they're adults. They're studying together. And there's another person besides them. So, because if someone says authorizes someone else to write a get, so you need two witnesses there. So he has two witnesses. He has the third party, not related, and he has the teacher and the son. But only one of them can be witnesses because they are related to each other. So Amalehu betre minaichu nichtebu gita ledebitu. He says, two of you, three people, should write a get for my wife. So when he says that, right, he means it's going to be the third party who's not related, and then either the teacher or the student or the son, either the teacher or the son. Okay, Lesof shechib makre yanoka. Now, in the meantime, the teacher died, leaving only the son of the teacher. Mi meshavu inashe beral shelicha b'makom abba ola. So here's the question: can that third party who's not related and the son join together as witnesses and go ahead with the writing of the get, or not? Depends on this. When this person, the husband, walked in, right, and he says 2 out of the 3 of you, do we assume that he meant the third party and the teacher, because right, he's older? You assume that the father is going to be the one, and a person does not make a shaliach to a son when there's a father there, right? If there's a father and son, everyone's going to assume that the father is one that's appointed. If so, now that the father died, so now you only have one witness, and the son who was not appointed, so that's not sufficient. So then there's nobody to give a get. Or no, not necessarily. Maybe when he walks in and says 2 out of the 3 of you, he means I don't care which 2 out of the 3 of you, right? It can't be the father and the son, but it could very well be that third party and the son. That's totally fine. And if so, then even if the father died, the son was appointed as a shaliach. He was included in the 2 out of the 3 of you, and they can go ahead and give a get. That's the question. Rav Nachman Amar la meshavu inashe bera shelicha b'makom abba. Rav Nachman says no. A person does not designate a son if the father's around. If the father's around, you give that honor to the father. When he said 2 out of the 3 of you, he meant the father and the other guy, not the son. So they cannot go ahead since the father died. Whereas Rav Papi says a person would designate a son even though the father was there, and he meant any 2 out of the 3 of you. The father, the son is fine. Rava says halacha is more lenient, like Rav Papi, that a person can and would make a messenger for a son even in the presence of his father. The next Mishnah is talking about a totally healthy person. Amar lishnayim tenu get leishti, or lishlosha kitbu get utnu leishti, hare elo yichtibu v'yitnu. A husband says to 2 people, he only says, give a get to my wife, but in order to give it, it's going to have to be written. Or if he tells 3 people, write and give a get to my wife, so those people, those either 2 people or 3 people, they should write the get themselves, and they should give the get as well. Amar lishlosha tenu get liishti, hare elu yomeru la'acherim v'yichtabu mipnei she'asa'an betin dibrei Rabbi Meir. If a person told 3 people and he left out kitvu, just give, well, 3 people in that scenario, when he didn't say write, those 3 people, they can tell someone else to write it if they don't want to write it themselves, because once it's 3 people, they are now a bet din, and a bet din is authorized to appoint someone else to write it on their behalf. So here's the point. If it's only 2 people, 2 people is not a bet din. And therefore, if he said, I want you to give a get, those 2 people have to write it themselves, because they're not authorized to tell someone else to do it. If a husband says you do it, so that doesn't give authority for them to appoint yet someone else. Come on, I'll discuss why. And if it's 3 people, however, so then the 3 people have a choice. They can write it themselves and give it, or because they are 3 people, according to the Rabbi Meir, they are a bet din, and a bet din does have the authority to appoint someone else to write it on their behalf. This is a halacha that Rabbi Chanina from Onos heard in the prison, and from Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was imprisoned by the Romans for teaching Torah in public when it was not allowed during the Bar Kokhba revolt. And his student Rabbi Chanina went to visit him, and he received this teaching. Mekubalani v'omer l'shlosha tenuget li'ishti she'omru la'achrim v'yichtabu mipnei she'asa'an beti. And I have a tradition that if a husband tells 3 people to give a get to his wife, that they can go ahead and tell someone else to write it. They don't have to write it themselves, because they are bet din, and a bet din has the authority to designate others to do something on their behalf, even if the husband didn't tell them that they can, specifically that they can appoint someone else. All right, so therefore we see that the halacha from Rabbi Akiva is the same as that which Rabbi Meir said. However, Amar Rabbi Yosef, Numenu lashaliach af anu mekubalin. At that time when we heard that, Rabbi Yosef says, we told the messenger who gave us that message that we also have a tradition, but it's different. Our tradition says that even if a husband said to the Supreme Court in Yerushalayim, give a get to my wife, then that court cannot appoint anyone else to write the get on their behalf. They have to write it themselves. And if they don't know how to write a get, they have to learn how to write it and give it. Either because they don't know how to write, I'll presume they know how to write, but maybe they don't know how the specifications of exactly how to write a get and the handwriting and all the other details. They have to figure it out and they have to write it themselves. They cannot appoint someone else. All right, so that's the machloket here. Next case, Amala Sara kitbu utnu get leishti echad koteb u'shnaim hotmin. Person, there were 10 people there around the husband, and he said, someone, write, some of you, write a get and give it to my wife. So then one person can write it, 2 people sign it. You only need 1 person to write it, but you need 2, right? At least 2 people to sign it. But all you need is 2, and so any of the 10 who is willing and ready can do that. But if he said, all of you, I want all of you to write it, then one of them has to write it. One of them writes it, and all of them have to sign. Therefore, if one of them should die, one of those 10 people, then the get is null and void, because if he dies before he gets a chance to sign, it's no good. Okay. Amar Yirmiyah bar Abba, Shalchu lemibe Rav l'Shmuel, Yilamedenu Rabenu, Amar l'Shnaim, Kitvu utnu get l'ishti, V'amiru l'Sofer v'chatav v'chatmu hen, Mahu, Shalach lehu teseh v'hadabar sarich Talmud. Okay, we're going to be discussing this case, the whole rest of this stuff. From the house of Rav, they asked a question to Shemuel. Can you please tell us the answer to this question? If a husband told 2 people, write and give a get to my wife. Now, we just saw in the Mishnah that what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to write it themselves. But what if they didn't write it themselves? They asked a sofer to write it for them, to write the get, even though those 2 people did sign it. So the signing is good, but they didn't write the get themselves. They asked someone else to write the get. Is that okay or not? Is it valid? And Shemuel sent back, it's a safek. If she got married already, based on this get, she should leave that second husband. And we have to go and study the matter. In other words, she's in limbo. She's not, we can't say for sure she's divorced or not divorced. Okay, that was his answer. Now we're going to have to analyze that answer. And my hadavar sarich limud, Talmud. Why does it need further study? What is exactly the safek? So for the rest of this page, we're going to try to figure out why was Shemuel in safek. See if we figure out a way that Shemuel could have decided the matter for sure, either one way that it is a get or that it's not a get. Then we have a problem because Shemuel had a safek. And so we assume Shemuel knew everything and all the arguments, and so we have to come up with a reasoning in which we are in doubt. So that's our goal, to figure out why this is a doubtful case. Maybe it's because the husband only said words, and we have a safek whether with words you can appoint an agent can appoint another agent or not. See, here's the rule. If I'll say I'm the husband and I give a get to an agent and I said, here, take this get to my wife, since that's not just words, he has an item in his hands, that agent can say, you know what, I can't make it all the way. He can appoint another agent and hand off the get and say, here, you be the second agent and go ahead and give it to the wife. That's okay, because there's an item. But if it's only words, like in this case, the husband told these 2 people, you 2 write and give a get. And then they appointed a second agent. They appointed the scribe to write it for them. And so we're not sure, can a first agent ask a second agent when it's mere words or not. Maybe that's the safek, and Shemuel didn't know. No, that can't be, because v'hamar Shemuel amar Rabbi halacha k'Rabbi Yosef amar mile la mimseran l'shaliach. Shemuel made a ruling that the halacha is like Rabbi Yosef, who said that if a verbal directive cannot be transferred to a second agent. So that would, for that reason, it's for sure no good. Rather, we have to find something else that Shemuel was not sure about. Ela Shemuel hakami ba'yaleh. Hai ketobu I ketav yadan I ketav haget. Here's what he's not sure. When the husband said to the two people, write a get, was that referring only to their signatures or to the entire text of the get? If it's referring to just the signatures, so then that's okay. They did sign it, right? And since he didn't say anything about, the husband didn't say anything about the get, so, well, they have to sign something, so obviously they're going to have a get, so then it'll be okay for them to go and ask someone else to write a get. But if the word ketova was referring to the entire get, and he says, I want you to write the get, then they have to write the get, and they would not be able to give it to someone else. All right, so maybe that's what Shemuel's safek was. But then we say, no, look, we can answer that question. Our Mishnah that we just read said that if a husband says to two people to give a get, or he says to three people, write and give a get, so they have to write it and give it. Doesn't that mean that they have to write the whole get? And so it would not be a safek. They would have to write the entire get themselves, and they couldn't ask anybody else. So we say that's not a proof, because he gufa kami ba'yaleh. That very clause in the Mishnah is not clear. Ketabu, ketav yadanhu, or ketav hagethu. When he said write it, does that mean only their signatures or the entire text? So that clause is ambiguous. Maybe we can learn it from the next clause in the Mishnah. Peshita te katav hagetu. It's got to be the entire get. Te katana sefek de katana sefa. Amar Rabbi Yosef numenu l'shaliach. אף אנו מקובלים שאפילו אמר לבית דין הגדול שבירושלים תנו גט לאשתי שילמדו ויכתבו וייתנו לה. The next clause there was Rabbi Yosef's statement that we also had a tradition, and even if someone tells the Beit Din, the Hagadol, to give a get to the wife, they have to write it themselves. Now, let's analyze that phrase. When it says they have to write it themselves, write what? Write the get or write the signature? If it's to write the whole get, that makes sense, because maybe even the Sanhedrin, maybe they don't know how to write a get, because usually a scribe writes it. It's a very particular job that a scribe always does, and so just because someone is a judge, even if they're a very smart judge, maybe they're not practiced in writing a get, so that could be. But if it means only their signatures, is there a bet din that has judges that don't even know how to sign their names? Right? That would not make any sense. So therefore, we can prove from this section that means that to write the whole get, in which case we can prove it, and it's not a safek. So what would be Shemuel's safek? So we answer, in ika bedina hadata. In fact, it could be a new court that has new members, and maybe they didn't learn how to sign their signatures just yet. And so this is in fact a safek. We're not sure if the words when he says write a get, does that mean only their signatures or to write the entire get? So at this point, we understand Shemuel's safek. If the husband saying, go ahead and write, means to write the whole document, then surely they have to write the whole document, and they cannot give it to a sofer, and it's no good. Whereas if it means just your signatures, then they have to write their signatures, but they would be able to hand it off to a scribe to write the rest of it. So now we're going to question that very assumption. V'isi b'relan dehai ketovu ketav yadanhu, hai ketav get kasher, v'amar Shemuel, amar Rabbi, halacha k'Rabbi Yosef, amar mili, la mimseran l'shaliach. If, in fact, you think that ketovu means just the signatures, and then that means writing the get by a sofer is good, but didn't Shemuel, we just quoted him quoting Rabbi Yosef, that a verbal directive is not considered a directive that can be passed on to an agent. And so the husband did not actually say anything about writing the get itself. He said, just sign it. Okay, sign it, but they need a get, so fine, we can say, oh, that infers that you have to write a get, but that's only telling them, and it's only verbal, so then that only implies that they can write the get themselves, not that they can pass it on to someone else. There's only a verbal instruction, and surely cannot be passed on to anybody else, no matter what. אמרי אי סבירי לה דכתוב וכתב ידן הוא כתב הגט נעשה כאומר אמרו ומודה רבי יוסף באומר אמרו. Oh, here we go. We're going to follow this assumption. If the husband saying right is right, you have to write it, refers only to their signatures. That's it. Only their signatures have to be theirs. The husband is insistent on that. But he didn't say anything about writing the get itself, so he doesn't really care about who writes the get, and therefore this is similar to a case where the husband says imru. If a husband, even according to the Yosef and Shemuel, if a husband says, I want you, messenger A, to tell someone else, messenger B, to do something, then that for sure is good, even if it's only words. If he said explicitly, you are authorized to tell someone else to do it, then it's okay. And this case is the same as Imiru, even though he didn't say anything, precisely because he didn't say anything about who should write the get. He only said, you write the signatures. He said nothing about who should write the get. So we assume it's as if he said, you can tell someone else to write the get, and that's why it would be okay if that's on that branch. ומי מודה רבי יוסף באומר אמרו, והתנן כתב סופר ועד כשר, ואמר רבי ירמיה חתם סופר שנינו. Now we're going to question this very assumption that even if a husband says אמרו, go tell someone else, that is valid. Because we have a Mishnah coming up later on that says that, let's say a scribe, the same scribe who wrote the whole get, he was one of the witnesses, and someone else was the other witness. That's kosher. And regarding that Mishnah, we have a couple of points of information that we discussed there. We will see that. That Yirmiyah said, when it says Ketav Sofer, it's referring to not just the writing, but the signature. One of the signatures is that of the scribe. That's what that Mishnah means. Furthermore, V'amar Rav Chisda, matnitin maneh, Rabbi Yosehi damar mile la mimseran l'shaliach. And Rav Chisda said, when we discussed that Mishnah, that is the author is Rabbi Yosef, who said you cannot, a husband cannot authorize an agent to appoint another agent if it's only words. Now, with all that information, here's the question. V'isal kadatech modeh Rabbi Yosef be'omer imru nafek mina horba dezimnin damar lehu lishnayim imru lasofer v'ichtob v'liflon ufloni v'yachtemu mishum kisufa desofer hayshe umachteme chad mehanach sahadeh v'sofer be'adayhu u'ba'al la amar hachi. Now, if you think that according to the Yosef, if a husband says, go tell someone else to do something, then that an agent can appoint an agent if he says so explicitly, then we're going to have a potential big problem in this case. Because it could be that the husband will tell two people, imru la sofer, you are authorized to tell a scribe to write the text of the get, and he'll write it, and then you go tell those two people, another two people to sign it, right? The husband says that, so yes, he's appointing someone to go and appoint all these other people. Here's the problem. Because this agent will be embarrassed from the scribe. Listen, scribe, I trust you, the husband trusts you to write the get, but he doesn't want you to sign it. I'm supposed to go tell two other people to sign it. So the scribe may feel bad about this. Why doesn't he want me to sign it? What's wrong with me? Why can't I sign it? And so the agent is going to feel bad not to embarrass the scribe. So he'll tell the scribe, listen, you write it, and also you be one of the people that sign it. The problem is that the husband did not say so. The husband authorized the scribe only to write it, but did not authorize the scribe to sign it. But the agent is going to do that anyway to avoid shaming him, and this will be a big problem because this get will be invalid. And so this would be a big problem. Therefore, it can't be that the Yosef would allow for such a problem to come up. Instead, it must be the Yosef does not think that even if the husband says imru, that could appoint an agent to appoint another agent. It would if you see a get with the signature of a scribe, and he also signed it, then it must be that the husband told the scribe directly to do that, in which case it would be totally fine, and there would be no possibility that an agent made that mistake. And so we can prove from here that even according to the Biyoseh, no, an agent, even if you say imru, they cannot appoint another agent. But we answer that. The master Rav, we're going to see later on, says it is kosher technically, but it should not be done. Since he said don't do this, therefore it's not common, and that's why we don't have to worry that such a thing will happen in the future. We now follow up with another very similar case that will try to prove the same thing, that according to the Biyoseh, he does not have imru. V'lechush dilma amar lehu lebet tere imru lasofer v'yichtob ve'atem hatomu v'az lehanach mishum kisufa desofer u'machteme lesofer be'adeh had minayhu u'ba'al lo amar hachi. Why don't we worry that if the husband will tell two people, go and you can tell the sofer to write the get, and then you two will sign it. This is slightly different from the previous one. The previous case, he told the agent to appoint both the sofer and the edim. Here he's telling him to appoint only the sofer, but that the two people he's commanding to sign are there with him. So, and here also we can worry that the agent then will go to the scribe and he'll be embarrassed to tell the scribe, listen, only write the get, don't sign it, like there's something wrong with him that we don't want him to sign it. He's there anyway, he has the pen, why don't he just sign it? So because he's going to be embarrassed not to insult the scribe, he's going to tell the scribe, you know what, you be one of the signatories. The problem is that the husband did not say that, and therefore we'll have a disaster because this get will be invalid because the husband only authorized the sofer to write the get, not to sign the get, and now the sofer signed the get, and so that's an invalid signature, and then she's going to go and get remarried based on this, and this is going to be a big problem. And we don't worry about that. If we don't worry about that, it must be because the Biyoseh does not think that imru works, that the husband can appoint an agent to appoint another agent at all. So we answer here also, Amreha nami kasher velo te'asehu. Here also, we're going to see on the next staff, there is an opinion that says this, even though it's permitted to do so, the rabbi said one should not do so, since the rabbis already said don't do it, so it's not common, and that's why we don't have to worry about it. But at this point, we have an answer to Shemuel's dilemma. His dilemma was, Shemuel follows Rabbi Yosef in all matters, and his dilemma is, does kitvu mean to write the whole get? And in which case it's invalid because these two people did not write the whole get. They gave it to a scribe to write, and that's not okay. Or kitvu means just sign it, and these two people did in fact sign it, so that's okay. Now the husband did not tell them to write it at all, and since he didn't tell them to write it, someone has to write it. So it's as if he said imru, and according to what we just discussed, even Shemuel and Rabbi Yosef would agree that imru is valid. A husband, even though a husband cannot say mile, cannot say just words for an agent to appoint another agent, if he says explicitly, go and tell another agent to do it, then that works. And so that would be the side that the get is valid. You had the signatories, they signed it themselves, and it's as if he said imru for the scribe to go and write it. And so this is good. Now we have an answer to the dilemma. But just one more step. We're about to see in the beginning of the next staff that there is an opinion, there's a machloket about this case. Alright, so this is fine according to the opinion that says this is kosher, but the rabbi said don't do it. But according to the other opinion that says this is kosher, and you can do it. Go ahead, licha techila, it's totally fine to tell the witnesses to appoint a sofer, and the witnesses themselves will sign it. So then you have to be worried about imru. And so this, if we're not worried about it, then that would imply that Rabbi Yosef thinks imru doesn't work at all. That's why he's not worried about such a case. If we have a get with a regular signatory and the scribe being the other signatory, we don't have to worry about this case because that Mishnah we already said is Rabbi Yosef. We don't have to worry about this case because he says you can't use imidu at all. So then that way you don't have to worry that that's ever going to come to such a case. So according to this opinion, Rabbi Yosef thinks imidu doesn't work. If so, then we don't have two sides of the dilemma, because if kitvu means the whole get, it's invalid because these two guys didn't write the whole get, they gave it to someone else. If kitvu means just the signatures, well then also who authorized the scribe to write the get? Nobody, right? And even if the husband said imiru, it wouldn't work. So, therefore, we're going to have a problem if we follow Rabbi Yosef all the way through. Rather, Rabbi Yosef has two different opinions. Shmuel doesn't have to consistently follow Rabbi Yosef all the time. He decided that he follows Rabbi Yosef in one matter, which is that a verbal designation cannot be transferred to an agent. There he agrees, but he does not agree with Rabbi Yosef, whereas Rabbi Yosef says imiru doesn't work. Shemuel thinks that imiru does work, and that would be the final answer. So basically, according to Shemuel, his dilemma in this case was, if kitvu means write the whole get, then it's going to be invalid because these witnesses did not sign the whole get. They gave it over to someone else, the scribe, to write it, and therefore it's invalid. Or kitvu means just the signatures. And since he said, and they did sign it, and he didn't tell them anything about the writing of the get, therefore it's like he said imiru. And according to Shemuel, against Rabbi Yosef, Shemuel says imiru works. It's as if the husband told the witnesses, you can tell someone else to write the get, which they did, and in that case it would be totally fine. And so now we have a good conclusion that we finally understand the dilemma that Shemuel was in. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen v'Amen.